Hello, and thank you for listening to the Weston Way, the official podcast of the city of Weston, Florida. I'm Pam.
And I'm Roxana.
And we're your hosts for today's episode. Running a city takes more than great parks and safe streets. It also takes smart financial planning. Today, we're pulling back the curtain with Weston's Chief Financial Officer and Assistant City Manager, Darrel Thomas, to walk us through our city's finances. Darrel, welcome to the studio today.
Good morning, Pam. I'm excited to be here.
So before we get into the money talk, we want to learn more about you. So you have the opportunity to give our listeners a little perspective about who you are and how you got into government financial operations.
Sure. Thank you. So grew up in South Florida, Coral Springs, went to Taravella High School, and then from there went to Florida Atlantic University, got undergraduate degree in finance, started in engineering, realized I didn't want to make solar cookers, and so decided to switch my major. And then after that, I went to Florida International University, got a Master's of Science in Finance there. I also worked at Franklin Templeton Investments, downtown Fort Lauderdale. And then after a few years there, I got recruited out to come work for the city of Weston, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome. Very good. So you have that private sector experience as well, bringing that perspective to the public sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, between the educational background and the work experience, investments, value, creating value for folks has been something that it's in my DNA.
And that's one of our key missions here in the city of Weston is value, success, and integrity. So you're right on the nail. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm the value part of the value, success, and integrity.
That's amazing. We're super glad to have you. And, we wanted to start the episode talking about a quote that you particularly use when you begin your presentations on finance. And it's a Thomas Jefferson quote that says, "The finances of government should be clear and intelligible, so that every man should be able to comprehend them, to investigate abuses, and consequently to correct them." Why do you begin with that quote, and what does that mean to you?
I believe that integrity is the backbone of any public servant, any person really, in your daily life. And so I think it's important that we're able to communicate exactly what we're doing with the finances of the city, with the taxpayer dollars that we're tasked with managing, and be able to demonstrate that we're being fiscally responsible, with those dollars.
That's one of the main differences, I believe, in public sector operations versus private sector. Let's talk a little bit more about those transparency requirements that we have and how we implement those.
Yeah, so that was one of the toughest things for me to transition to when I came to government because, everything's in the open, it's all transparent, and in fact, we share information with each other as we're trying to make all of our cities better.
Right.
When we go to conferences, we talk about what we're doing in our respective jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the private sector side, we don't share secrets. I always like to joke
proprietary.
Yes, exactly. I always like to joke that KFC doesn't share the Colonel's secret herbs and spices in the chicken, and so that was very interesting for me to transition over. But I've loved it because we do a lot of really great things here in Weston, and so it's been great to share those things with my colleagues in other cities. So, but yeah, there's some other differences. Regulatory bodies are different. Private sector versus public sector. I think one of the big differences is in the private sector, you've got shareholders, and you've got voting rights and stock and things like that, and you're beholden to shareholders. Whereas, in the public sector here in government, we're beholden to residents, businesses, taxpayers, voters, visitors, and so our stakeholder net is a lot broader, and we don't get to choose those folks, right? They choose us.
Right.
They choose to live here, or they choose to visit here, and when they're here, we're responsible for them and making sure that the experience of being here in Weston is a special one.
What about government accounting standards? Are those across the board the same, or is it different for government?
There are a few subtle differences. Most of the basic accrual-based accounting rules apply in both private sector and public sector. But one big difference in government is, we undertake a lot of large projects that span over multiple fiscal years.
Right.
And so being able to have that, what we call encumbrance accounting, is pretty important and has a different type of regulation that normal businesses might not have those things where they're building buildings. Right,
Parks.
exactly.
Right.
The real estate industry is probably the other industry that's similar to government in that regards, building homes, building buildings, that kind of stuff, developing property. But it's, these
in
long
terms of the
lead
time
times.
frame of the projects.
Yes, yes.
And when it comes to, we talk a lot about the Weston Way, how Weston does things differently. How would you say the Weston Way differs from other local governments when it comes to finance?
So obviously still playing by the same set of rules and regulations that are, either at the federal level or state level, and even some at the local county level. But I think we always have that value lean to, bend to us, where we're like, hey, does this make sense? We don't want to spend more money than it takes to bring money in, let's say, on a grant program. Or, we contract out for services a lot. And so the contracting way for services helps in terms of offloading some of the liability risk, offloading, we don't have any pension liabilities. We also don't have any unions, so we don't have to have, union negotiation teams and the lawyers and all that stuff. We don't have a full-blown HR department, So it's able to keep us streamlined from a financial perspective. And it makes it easier for us to budget, because those contracts have certain provisions in there for escalation based on the consumer price index and just inflation. And so, if the contract is set to go up by 3% next year, then we know it's going up by 3%. Whereas in a traditional sense of finances, right, people might be getting different increases, or things might be going up by different amounts. And so it's a little bit more difficult when you don't have that certainty in there. But the certainty is great, because what it allows us to do is project out a lot easier.
Right.
And also, when we can project out a lot easier, we can figure out how much we need to ask the residents or the taxpayers to contribute to that. So we can plan the tax structure a little bit easier as well.
And what about, like, in terms of borrowing money? I know our bond ratings are high, and that's usually not so typical of government. Can you explain that?
Yes. Obviously, the higher credit rating that you have, AAA versus AA, and so on and so forth, single A, you get more favorable borrowing rates. So you get lower interest rates when you do need to borrow for new fire vehicles, or to build a building, or to rehab a park. And so that's super helpful in terms of keeping the cost down for the taxpayers, because the principal portion of the debt is just money that you're returning back to someone that they gave you. It's really the interest portion is the cost.
Right.
Right. So to the extent we can keep the interest down, that keeps the cost down for the residents. And how do we do that? So we do that by maintaining good reserves, so that we can weather financial difficulties, or we have backstops in case we have issues with our revenues. We do that by maintaining good governance, being willing to make difficult decisions that keep the city in good financial position.
Right.
And then we don't have the pension liabilities that other cities have, which I think also really helps in terms of us getting a good rating. So those are the 3 or 4 main points that really help us. And again, it's all about keeping the cost down for the taxpayers.
Our AAA bond rating has been that for how many years now?
Since the city's inception.
Almost 30
So
years.
almost 30 years, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, even before I got here, so it kind of puts a little pressure on me to maintain it.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's harder to maintain a level than to actually reach that pinnacle of the goal.
Absolutely. And in the environment that we're, a lot's changed in 30 years, right? First of all, the city's 30 years older, so the things here are not new anymore. So trying to maintain those things as we come into this life cycle of the city, and rehabbing some of our buildings and rehabbing some of our parks, and our water sewer infrastructure has been so important these last few years. And it'll be important for the next probably 10 to 20 years as we kind of like cycle through all this infrastructure and all this stuff.
Right. Absolutely. Now, on the last podcast episode, we spoke about budget and the upcoming fiscal year preparations for fiscal year 2026. How does finance and budget work together, and what is the difference? Because sometimes, our listeners, like myself, may not be numbers people. We're words people in communications. Kind of break that down and explain the difference in operations.
Sure. So finance is the accounting portion. It will typically also include like cash management and the budget side of things is typically in the state of Florida, it's your legal authority to spend, and the budget is adopted by the commission. The commission has really two functions that are mandated by state law. One is to pass a budget, and one is to pass a comp plan, a land use plan. So the budget process is very, very important in the state of Florida. And again, it's our authority to spend. We can't spend more than the budget authority provided by the commission. And then within that budget authority, management has the direction to manage the operations of the city, and then finance has the responsibility of recording all those transactions, managing the cash, and so on and so forth. So, the big thing that I like to tell people is finance is backward looking, right? It's recording things that already happened, and budget is forward looking, projecting things that are going to happen. And so budget's always living in the world of today and beyond, and finance is always living in the world of today and in the past. And so if you think, and so to the extent that I am the bridge between finance and accounting, I'm always living in the past, the present, and the future.
Right. You keep it right. Exactly. You have to kind of bridge that gap between the past and the future and look ahead while also accounting for all of the expenses and stuff. So yeah, that's cool.
And talking about Weston's fund specifically, can we have a little bit of a breakdown in terms of the sources of income for Weston, like Weston's revenues?
Most of it, I would say maybe a third of it comes from property taxes. Another third of it or so comes from user fees. And then the remainder is a mixture of things, but there are some other restricted taxes, like we get a share, as an example, we get a share of the gas tax at the pump. We get a share of state sales tax from the state. So there are some other revenue sources that we receive, and those revenue sources are restricted for that purpose. So user fees, for example, are restricted for like permit fees. Whatever we charge for permit fees have to only be used to fund the operations of the building department or the permit department.
Right.
That gas tax revenue they receive is only to be used for roads, as an example. So there are some restrictions, and then unrestricted revenues, you've got some utility taxes, and you've got some the property tax. And then within the property tax structure, if someone gets their bill, that entire bill doesn't go to Weston. So just as an example, you might see the taxes on the front, and in Broward, or at least in Weston, 19 cents out of every dollar on that tax bill comes to Weston. The majority of that money goes to the county and the school board to run the schools and to run the county. So when you're looking at your tax bill, it's always good to look at those other jurisdictions. You'll see some other things on there. There's an assessment for garbage, for solid waste pickup.
Right.
Some cities put it on the water bill. We put it on the tax bill as a special assessment. It literally is the cost of the service for each particular home. There's no bringing in extra money or anything like that. Right. Same thing for stormwater and Indian Trace and Bonaventure. We manage the stormwater system. Some cities put it on the water bill. We do it as a special assessment, and that's the lakes, canals to manage the whole drainage system so we can stay above water.
Right, exactly. Important.
Yeah, so important, exactly, in South Florida. And then the fire assessment as well. Literally just the cost of the service allocated out to the various homes and non-residential properties. And so you'll see that as well.
And property owners just received their truth and millage forms, so they can kind of take a look. Like we said at the last podcast episode, we said it was coming soon. You should have already received it now, but you can see all of those different taxes and the agencies and authorities that are charging those.
Yes, and then the ad valorem tax specifically is in the city's general fund, and so that primarily funds police, EMS services, and parks. Those three functions are about 70 to 80% of the general fund.
Right.
So that's the bulk of what, when folks talk about what do I get for my property taxes, that's 4/5 of it right there is police, EMS, and parks and recreation.
Excellent. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back to talk a little bit more about the financial transparency that we have here in Weston. Stay tuned.
As temperatures rise, so does the risk of heat-related illness. Stay safe when you're enjoying our beautiful Weston parks or working outside. Hydrate regularly, wear light-colored clothing, and take breaks in the shade or air conditioning. And don't forget sunscreen and bug spray. Heat exhaustion and dehydration can come on quickly, so take it slow and stay cool. A little preparation goes a long way.
Vehicle break-ins can happen in seconds, and most often they're preventable. We want to remind everyone, lock it or lose it. Always lock your car, roll up the windows, and never leave valuables like wallets, electronics, or purses in plain view. Even in your driveway or a safe area, thieves are watching for easy targets. Follow the 9 p.m. routine. At 9 p.m., take your belongings and lock up every time.
City decisions affect all of us, so why not get involved? Attend a Weston City Commission meeting and learn more about what's happening in your community. Meetings are open to the public, live streamed online, and available as recordings. From parks planning to public safety, your input matters. Visit westonfl.org for dates, times, and agendas. It's your city. Be part of the conversation.
And we're back on the Weston Way Podcast with Darrel Thomas, our CFO for the city of Weston, talking about our financial operations. Darrel, before the break, we were talking about the funds and the source of revenues that we have to fund the city of Weston's operations. Let's talk about one of our values, which is integrity. And it all relates to finance and how we handle our finances and seek out potential fraud, internal, external. I know you participate in our ethics training where all of the staff are trained annually on fraud and ethics. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So, one of the big things, so I'm a member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. It's mostly kind of forensic, Department of Justice type folks, and also like internal audit type of people they're basically looking for fraud, waste, and abuse. And I do participate in that organization, been to a lot of training, and I'm a member. So, and I bring that back to the annual ethics and fraud training that we do. And one of the big things that the fraud examiners group will tell you is that the tone at the top of your organization is key in terms of rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse. And so, along with myself, other assistant city manager, Carl Thompson, and our city manager, Don Decker, are very big about integrity, fraud, waste, looking at things, scrutinizing things. And so we provide this annual ethics and fraud training. And I use a lot of the material from the Fraud Examiners Association in my presentation, data points, instances of fraud, examples of fraud, videos, and additional information like that. And we've got some good internal controls as well to try to mitigate fraud. But a good story comes to mind where the city was allocated about $800,000 in COVID relief funds,
right,
and the check never made its way to the city from the county. Place a call over to the county, and they said, "Oh, we sent the money, and it was cashed." And we're like, "Well, it wasn't cashed by us." Turns out it was intercepted. I don't know by whom, but it was intercepted. That person created a fictitious company in the state of Georgia called City of Weston LLC.
Crazy.
Oh my goodness.
Signed the check, endorsed it, and cashed it. On our end, the county was able to get with their bank to initiate instance of fraud and get law enforcement involved. They got their funds back, at least, through their bank, and they were able to reissue a check to the city. So we were made whole. I had to fight to make sure the city of Weston was made whole.
Right.
Obviously, the county didn't want to be out 800,000 times too.
Right.
So that was a process. But what's interesting is that, so a year after this happened, I got a notice in the mail from the state of Georgia asking me to renew our City of Weston LLC registration.
Oh my goodness.
So that's how I figured out that that's what that person did. Obviously shared that with law enforcement a year later as they were trying to go through their investigation. But there's just, so many bad actors out there, especially in a crisis, which is sad, but crises are opportunities for folks to take advantage. Yes. Yeah. So we're very big on internal controls here as well. And when we get requests for purchase orders and things like that, the staff will tell you, actually, Pam, you probably experience it.
Right.
We scrutinize it.
Right.
We ask a lot of questions as to why are we submitting this? Do we have an existing approval? Is this within our purchasing thresholds? And then if somebody is asking for a change order to that, where's the backup for the change order request? So we're very sticklers on that, but I think it's because that's just, we're integrity like that. We also want to make sure that we're doing things the right way. If we protect the city, I think we'll all be okay.
Yes, we're all stewards of the city's finances.
Absolutely.
In every way that we spend money. So we're always also making sure that we're choosing the best vendor for the services or goods that we're getting, and
Absolutely.
working well with your department and with procurement on that process.
And here's what's great about the experience that I have and that we have in finance and in procurement as well, is with that fraud examiner background and some of that training, we're able to ask questions of the departments and the staff that fraud examiner type folks and internal control folks would ask.
Right.
So that if we ever were investigated, right, we should be able to answer those questions that we would get from a forensic auditor or an external, like inspector general or something like that. We should be thinking in that manner, and we do.
Right.
That's great. And I also believe I remember that there's a third-party auditing that takes place, correct? To make sure, again, to add to that transparency.
Yes, that's correct. So state law requires an annual external audit. The auditors are hired by and work for the city commission. They do not work for city staff. So it is very much third party. Obviously, it creates a little bit of tension because you think you're doing a good job, and you've got somebody who's no, we're coming in here to make sure you're doing a good job. And so it's always a little nerve wracking, but I have confidence in our staff and in the way that we do things here, that we're doing the right things. But I'm also open to the fact that we may not be doing everything as well as we can. And so any opportunity for someone to come in and provide a fresh set of eyes and perspective and some feedback is always great, because we can always get better. We've definitely made improvements based on suggestions we've received from external auditors over the years. So it's an
extra layer.
It's an extra layer, right? And like I said, they report to the commission. So it's the commission's oversight authority and oversight arm as well.
Are the auditor's findings published in the annual financial report, or is that a separate publication that's published to the commission?
They are published in the annual financial report.
Okay.
Yes, any findings are in the back, and any material findings are published there.
Right. And I know, like you said, there's always room to grow, always new processes that can be put in place, and you've always been great at looking at that and kind of implementing new ways to be more efficient and improve on those processes.
Absolutely. The saying of that's just the way we've always done it, it doesn't really hold water with me. I always like to re-question the things that we do to confirm whether or not the way we're doing it is still the best way or not. And so, I'm always open to that. And the great thing about here in Weston is we've got such a great staff in terms of being flexible and amenable to changes.
Yes.
And to doing things differently and to doing new things and things new ways, that, we're kind of just used to the culture of change and adaptability here, which is awesome.
Yes, I was going to say that's super important to have as a culture that will it's what allows growth.
Yeah.
And speaking of transparency, I understand that there's a specific portal that's open and available for residents that are interested and are curious in learning a little bit more about our finances. Can you explain a little bit more on that?
Sure. So we've got the financial transparency portal. It's got data all the way back to fiscal year 2022. So it's got about 4 or 5 years worth of fiscal data in there. And it has revenue information by detail, expenditure information by type, and then also spending by vendor. So you'll see in there, if you go the largest vendor or the vendor with the most spend is Broward Sheriff's Office.
Right.
Obviously, they provide us with police, EMS, and fire services. And then you'll be able to see our revenues as well. And it's in graph form. You can also filter it as well if you want to look at the detail. And so that's been a super helpful tool in terms of being able to get that information out to folks and have it be available. Again, also too, I think just the more you're willing, the more you put out there, I think the more folks are like, okay, you're being open about the things that you're doing, and you're not kind of trying to hide anything. In our budget process, our budget's a line item budget.
Right.
And so there's that level of detail. We're small enough, and with the contracts, we're able to do a line item budget. A lot of cities can't. They kind of have to roll it up by department or function, but we do a line item budget. That gets approved by the commission in September of every year, and there's 2 public hearings on that, and that tentative budget gets published in the summertime. So folks have an opportunity to download that or get access to that, read it, review it, and come to the September hearings with questions or with comments or feedback as the commission's looking to adopt the budget. The annual report is published usually around March of each year.
Right.
That also tells a story about how our spending went. Our budget to actual spend is in there. Footnotes about where the cash and investments are, projects, anything else. So there's a lot of information that's out there. And just to add to that too, that financial reporting data is also submitted to the state of Florida CFO's office and to the state auditor general.
Right.
And it's reviewed by them as well. And then the repository of all of the financial data for all of the cities and counties across Florida resides with the Florida CFO's office. So I could go back and look at not just Weston, but any city, any county's financials all the way back.
It's an open book.
It's an open book. It's all there.
Right.
Talk about transparency.
Transparency. And it's all exportable data.
Right.
And it's an opportunity, for residents to be better informed. And as you're saying, when they attend these different hearings, these different meetings, they can come in with some knowledge already in terms of the numbers and the budget and the finance of their city.
And for our listeners looking for that information, we have two sections. Like Darrel spoke about the budget, and we spoke about that in the last podcast, is all under the budget section of the city's website at westonfl.org. And then for the finance reports and the open transparency, open finance portal is all under finance. So just navigate the city's website. There's a video to help you with the navigation as well. There's a wealth of information. We keep it as up to date as possible to provide our residents with the best information to learn about their city.
And Darrel, what's your favorite feature of the portal?
I like being able to modify the graphs, and I like being able to export the data out and kind of look at how we've been doing over the last few years. I am very much introspective type of person, so I'm always benchmarking myself against myself. Like, am I better today than I was yesterday?
Right.
I don't really worry about how I compare to others too much because we're all different, right? And some of it is natural, just inherent. So I always think that way with Weston as well. Our finances, are we better than we were yesterday? And so I like being able to really track that information. One of the things that I look at from a value perspective is, in terms of giving back to the folks in Weston, there's not a lot of tangible things we can point to, right? We can say quality of life, and we could say public safety, and those are very subjective. And
it's hard to measure. Exactly.
Yeah, they're hard to measure. Exactly. One of the things we can measure, though, is property values. Right. So that's a way that I, as a finance person, can tangibly give back to the folks that invest their money in Weston. You buy property here, right? And so I know it's a place to live, but it's also an asset for you, and it can be a nest egg or a piggy bank or something for either you or your heirs at some point down the road. And so I like to look at spending as a percentage of taxable value and spending as a percentage of market value, because I feel like that's how we're giving back. Are we growing the city, the value of the city?
Right.
And recently checked those numbers. And our spending as a percentage of market value has been declining the last few years, which I think is I know is a good thing, but I think it demonstrates how we're controlling our spending relative to the growth of property values in Weston, and how we're adding to that value, keeping Weston, continuing to keep it a desirable place to be, generating that value for the folks that have invested here, their dollars here. And we're actually have trended below our 15-year average on that. And so when we start talking about efficiency, value, and those types of things, it's great to look at those kind of metrics. That's kind of our ROI, our return on investment. Is us taking the property tax dollars and growing that into property value appreciation.
Absolutely, and those numbers tell a story. So just looking at it from that lens really gives us a better understanding of how our operations are efficient, what type of value we're giving back to our community. So that's an awesome perspective.
100%. And one of the items, that we wanted to talk about in the episode, it's the Florida DUDGE. So what is the state's Department of Governmental Efficiency looking for? Can you talk a little bit more about that entire conversation that we know it's happening a lot right now?
Yeah, it's right. It started at the federal level and has trickled down, at least in Florida. to the state level. We're actually just in talking with some of my colleagues around the country, and I've participated on a lot of national associations, national panels, speaking engagements, and so on. So I've got a great network of folks all across the country. Even have a friend who friends who are finance directors and CFOs out in the state of California. So I get to talk to a lot of different folks, and what's great, I get to bring that information and knowledge back to Weston.
Yeah.
But getting back on, so we're Florida's the first state that has a really fully fledged kind of DOGE program. The state of Florida CFO and the state of Florida governor have put this together, and really the goal is to identify and reduce fraud, waste, and abuse in government. And so again, it's an opportunity for us to take a look at how we do things. Not that we don't always do that, but take a look at how we do things, ensure that we're doing things, the best way possible for folks. And, I'll tell you, even in the budget process, we're constantly scrutinizing every line that's in there. If we got a line where the last 2 years, we only spent 50% of that budget line, we're going back to that department and saying, look, this budget doesn't need to be where it's at, let's lower that. It doesn't, let's take a look at it. Or maybe it's possible that it's a maintenance line and a line item for maintenance, and we were able to defer maintenance for till the next year or something like that. So we're always scrutinizing those lines. I think the thought that government budgets just always go up.
That's not true.
It's not necessarily true. Yeah, right. I mean, I think in total, right? It's more likely than not, but not if you get down to each individual line. And here's why too. Government is services. We don't sell goods.
Right.
We don't make goods. We provide services. Services are provided by people. People like to get raises every year, like a little bit more in their check, right? At least keeping up with inflation. So if you're talking about services and services provided by people, and people need a little bit more in their check every year, then the costs for those services are also going to be a little bit higher each year.
Right.
It's where we can mitigate that is inefficiencies. Right. Can we do things with AI? Can we do things with technology? Mm-hmm. Contracting. Do we need a full body for that service? Maybe we can contract it out, and because we only need 500 hours worth of that work, or maybe it's temporary work, right? So instead of hiring a person, and having them end up being on the payroll indefinitely for something that might only be 2 years, So we look for those opportunities where we can kind of contract for things or to manage that as well. So we try to be smart.
And I'm assuming our contract style facilitates that and allows for even better, let's say, cleaner of a line when it comes to that.
Absolutely. Just as an example of one of our departments, so the building department, their contract is set so that they only, the company that runs the building department for us only makes money if they issue and close permits. So it's a completely self-funded operation. If no permits are pulled, that company doesn't get any money. So it's really driven on the business aspect of permit fees, permit revenue, and people coming in to pull permits. And then, because of the way their contract's set up, they get some of the money up front and they get the rest of the money on the back end when they close the permit. So there's an incentive for them to move these permits along and close them out.
Not just leave them there.
Not just leave them there.
Right.
But like I said, if for some reason there was not a single permit application that walked in the door, there's not a dime going to that company, and it's not subsidized by taxpayer dollars or tax dollars or anything like that. So that's just an example of how we're being efficient and how we're not burdening the taxpayers with an operation and not subsidizing it. And that may not be the case in other departments. Other places are subsidizing the building department, or because they've got in-house employees, right? They got to pay those people salaries, even if there's not a permit that walks in the door that day.
Right. Like during COVID.
Yeah.
That kind of ground to a halt for a little bit.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. But
it allows for better efficiency.
It does, for sure. And so, I think the Florida DOGE has been visiting a few cities and counties already. They've made a couple of requests of information of Weston they've made requests of cities as a whole, and Weston has been a part of that, has participated in that, and we provided responses as well. I think they're following up with whatever cities and counties they feel like they need to reach out to first. I expect that they'll come to Weston at some point, and I look forward to when they do. I think we're a great example of how things can be done in cities and counties. Again, I can't say that what we do is for everyone. There might be some functions that they feel like not everybody outsources their police and fire rescue, for example. You know, but I think the idea of identifying and reducing fraud, waste, and abuse is something we've always been doing here.
That's part of the Weston Way.
That's part of the Weston Way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So super excited, and some of the things that they're talking about in terms of minimizing risk. We already do that here, and the contract style, like I said before, offloads some of the liability that the city would otherwise have to take on in other circumstances.
And those efficiencies that they're looking for already exist by our nature of the contract style form of government. So
exactly.
We're well prepared for that. Also at the state level, can you mention briefly about the tax reform that is being talked about and how that might impact local government?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot came out of the last legislative session, ideas being floated out there about completely eliminating property taxes or creating super exemptions of up to $1 million and so on and so forth. Property tax, the ad valorem property tax that the city collects, is about the same amount, $41 million, as the cost of police and EMS services as well. So, when we talk about eliminating property taxes, we would need some other revenue source to be able to fund those operations.
Right.
We don't have a state income tax. We don't have a value-added tax, and we don't have our own sales tax. Those are things like, unless the legislature is going to open up the opportunity for cities and counties, like local governments, to be able to initiate new tax programs or new tax structures, there's got to be a way to replace that revenue to continue to, because as I told you before, and the key operations too, like police, EMS, and parks. I think when we talk about Weston, right, what do I hear? I mean, I moved here, I live here, right? It was about the schools, which we don't control, but we provide as much support to the schools and certainly the surrounding school properties as we can. It's about public safety, right? And everyone I know feels super safe here in this community, going out for like night runs or night. Walking to the neighbor's house or in the neighborhood, 100%. That kind of stuff. And then, the park facilities here are amazing. The quality of the fields, and not only that, but I go to some other cities and their good fields, as I quote unquote air quotes, their good fields are locked up.
Right.
They're not accessible to the public. Right. You can't use them. And here, you can go over to Sequester Trace Park and see all kinds of people out there using the artificial turf field. I'll see a kid working on kicking field goals, somebody else working on some lacrosse, somebody else working on some soccer agility drills, and then somebody out there just doing some kind of cross training. So, just those are the important things, I think, when we think about Weston, and then as well as the look and the landscaping and so on and so forth. And so, when we talk about property tax reform, we've got to find a way to be able to continue to
offer those things that people seek out Weston for.
And maintain what's important to Weston. So, there's a task force, a House committee that was created. There's going to be a study by the Office of Economic and Demographic Research. They're going to provide that study to the Special House Committee in November. Then the legislature will go through committee sessions, and then we'll see what comes out of the legislature. If there's going to be any changes to the Constitution, it's going to have to go on the ballot for November 2026.
Right.
And so, we'll see. The hard thing in Florida is with the Save Our Homes and all the tax exemptions, it makes it really difficult to make changes, because it's the way I like to describe it, it's like a balloon. You push down on one side of the balloon, the other side of the balloon has to go up. So if we cut taxes for one segment of the population of property owners, you have
to fill the gap
somewhere. You have to fill the gap somewhere, and so that's what worries me a little bit. But, Save Our Homes, I think, was a great thing, was enacted, but I think now we're 30 years into it. And, I see some properties where, the house is worth $750,000 or $1 million, and their taxable value is like $250,000. Just as an example, here in Weston, Weston's market value is about $19 billion, and the taxable value is about $12 billion. Now, let's kind of move away just for a second of the fact that we're talking about billions of dollars here, right?
Exactly.
But just think about the fact that $12 billion as a percentage of $19 billion is a big difference, right? And so that $7 billion or so of value isn't being taxed. And I'm not saying it should be taxed, but that's just an example of the property tax structure here in Florida, where most folks, especially the longer you stay in your home, are not being taxed at anywhere near the full value, let alone even half the value of the property that they own. And, so I hope that the legislature, we'll see what comes out of it. Like I said, I'm open for property tax reform and things to make things better and more equitable, because it's when neighbors next to each other pay completely different taxes for literally the houses are almost the same. They live side by side. That kind of doesn't seem to make sense intuitively. So maybe there'll be something that comes out of it. I really hope that they can provide relief to all in the form of some type of property insurance reform. I think that would be huge. Because I don't know about you, but my property insurance went up by a lot this year.
Right. And it's increasingly difficult to insure your property because there's, less insurance companies that are willing to do that here in the state of Florida.
Welcome to Florida. Yeah.
100%.
It is a lightning capital of the world. It's the hurricane capital of the world.
Flood zones.
Flood everywhere. Sinkholes. If you're north of Orlando, you get sinkholes. Yeah. And so there's a lot of risk here in the state. But the trade-off is great. I mean, it's a wonderful state. We've got a lot of different cultures here, a lot of great amenities like theme parks. We've got the beaches. We've got some urban areas, and then we've got the weather. I can't complain.
That's why people continue to move to Florida.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
We live where people vacation.
Right. So all right. It's like one less vacation spot on my list of vacation spots to go because I live here. I kind of feel like maybe I missed out on.
See it like a tourist.
Yeah, I do.
All righty, Darrel. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. We encourage our listeners to really look into some of the topics that we talked about today with the open transparency portal, with the upcoming state legislation happening. Just kind of tune in to what's going on, locally and at the state level to learn more about how Weston operates and what might impact your city services. Darrel, thank you so much for coming to the studio today, for being a part of our show.
Very glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Any final words for our listeners?
Yeah, stay engaged. I think we've got so much information on our website. There's so much opportunity to participate in the public hearings. Even if you don't come to the commission meetings, we still have maintained the COVID era structure of online and, that you can watch them online. And they're even after the meetings are over, they're published online as well. So you can go back and watch a meeting if you missed it. Always feel free to call my office or anyone on my team if anyone has questions. Right. We don't necessarily have every answer, but we can at least point folks in the right direction if we can't answer them. And, I think for me, personally, just to kind of close with this, leaving the private sector to come to the public sector for me was about creating value for stakeholders, families, and regular folks, just day-to-day people than it was for shareholders. And that's kind of what I felt when I was in the private sector, that I was helping to enrich shareholders, and I really feel I enjoyed so much more providing for regular families and regular folks, and the folks that even during COVID there were so many folks in need, and it made me feel really good and sleep well, knowing that I did everything I could do to help make the lives of folks better.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
That's so I don't know, I'll never go back to the private sector.
Right. You can make an impact on your neighbors and your local community through your work. So
absolutely.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Darrel, again. And for our listeners, you can access some of the information that we talked about, including the Open Finance Portal at westonfl.org/finance.
And for all of our listeners on the Weston Way Podcast, we encourage you to continue to listen and to rate us so we can hear how we're doing from you. Give us some of your feedback. You can also subscribe and share our podcast. Visit westonfl.org/podcast to give us suggestions on future episodes and also access all of our previous episodes if you missed one.
As always, follow city updates via our newsletter, Newsly Tuesday, social media, and the website.
Thank you, Roxana.
Until next time.